Hello, Evgeny. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. After the Chernobyl catastrophe, you were in charge of containing nuclear emissions from the exploded reactor. To understand what situation the Japanese workers are finding themselves in right now, can you explain to us what was it like to work in Chernobyl?
There was a great deal of work to be done. We only had seconds or minutes to do the job if we wanted to avoid a long-term impact on human health. Can you imagine what the conditions were like? According to statistics and the UN report, more than 650,000 rescuers took part in dealing with the consequences of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident. That gives you an idea about the scale of that effort in which practically all Soviet ministers and agencies were involved. 5 years had passed since that accident. We were commemorating that anniversary and we were drawing conclusions. The IAEA senior expert came to visit us from France. When he learned about what we had done, and when he learned that I had been one of those who survived the construction of containment over the damaged nuclear reactor, he said, "Mr. Evgeny, no one in the world, be it Americans, the British, the French, the Germans, nor the Japanese, could have done separately or together what you, the Soviet people, managed to do in such a short period of time." Let's not compare the two epochs and the attendant political circumstances. In Sweden, people came to work. They also have a nuclear plant over there, and as they entered the premises, radiation counters showed that they were polluted. An alarm was sounded, and an investigation began. The plant itself, the only possible source of trouble, was okay. If so, they looked at the windrows diagram, and it pointed to Kiev. The Swedes raised a worldwide concern, and so the Soviet Union was forced to admit that the accident had happened. It would have recognized the fact anyway, but only later. We were building them in India, in Iran, and in China. Turkey is preparing to place an order too. The collapse of the USSR did affect the industry. Chernobyl caused a big outflow. We estimated the situation and saw that the reactor core fragments were scattered over a wide area. Add to that atmospheric transport, so we realized that there was every reason to cover whatever could be a source of further radioactive discharge. A shelter had to be built. It was another matter what kind of shelter, but covering it was a must. It was decided that after a sarcophagus was built, people would be able to come close to it, and that radiation measurements on its surface shouldn't exceed 1 Roentgen an hour. That was unattainable, I regret to say, but the walls did show something near it. Where we failed was a roof. The work was on the verge of engineering risks. You had to have intuition and an immense amount of courage. The situation began to change, and that enabled helicopters to fly at a lower altitude for better observation. We developed specialized bathyscapes inside which people were lowered. Every day we gained new knowledge. Every day we introduced certain modifications, and as a result it became possible to do it within a brief period.
What happened to those who worked at the Chernobyl power plant after the explosion? Do you know the stories of those people? How many survived?
Today, I don't have the statistics how many of us are already dead. I think it's quite a lot. Invalids account for 60 or 70,000 out of those 650,000 rescuers whom I mentioned. In fact, the Chernobyl tragedy affected my whole family. Being a professional, I understood that there was no one to do the job except for the professionals. It's clear. Second, my wife dealt with nuclear energy, and she also visited the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Regrettably, today she has cancer. After several serious operations, she's now, though it was hard for me to say, a person with very limited physical abilities. But she's not the only one. There are many people like that. I think we can draw comparisons between the Chernobyl accident and the current events in Japan. And we should understand that there is a great difference between the two disasters. Luckily, according to the information which I have, although it's so scarce that even for an expert, it's hard to assess what's happening there.
In the worst case scenario, how bad the situation could be in Japan?
The only thing I can say is that no active zones or active fuel discharges into the atmosphere have taken place. Thank God. That's why the scale of disaster in Japan is different. Yes, it's true that the radiological situation around the station is periodically getting worse, and radiation levels are increasing dependent on the events there. I mean minor explosions, so to speak, that discharge radioactive gases. But the most important thing is that there are no discharges of nuclear fuel, which contains the entire Mendeleev's periodic table of chemical elements. That is why the events that are still unfolding in Japan will be less global than the Chernobyl nuclear